There's Atlas. He holds the world on his shoulders. What if Atlas shrugged, let the world fall?
What I'm really asking is, what would happen if the most productive people in the world, inventors, entrepreneurs, artists, scientists, got so disgusted with the increasing number of stupid rules that government keeps passing that they went on strike? It would be as if Atlas shrugged. And what I'm talking about, as most of you know, is this famous novel. It was written 50 years ago, but it's a bestseller today. Why?
Why is this old book a bestseller still? It's a story about an America where government's gotten so big and passed so many stupid and controlling rules that people say, enough. They stop producing for others. They go to a secret place and set up their own community where they're free to run their own lives. 4 of the main characters are Dagny Taggart, a businesswoman who runs a railroad. The villain, Wesley Mooch, a government bureaucrat who makes rules that control businesses. Orrin Boyle, a businessman who colludes with Mooch. And the hero, John Galt, an entrepreneur who leads a strike that gets the other productive workers to join him rather than obey Mooch's rules. The book is long, more than 1,000 pages. So how many people read books this long? Yet 7 million copies have been sold. I read half of it in high school, thought it was fun, then forgot about it. But then, after I became a consumer reporter and watched government fail again and again in its attempts to make life better for consumers, I read this again and I couldn't believe what I was reading. It was like the author, Ayn Rand, had seen the future. 52 years ago, she wrote a description of what's happening in America now. Explosive growth of government, an increasing number of Wesley Mooch-like rules. Somehow she knew what was going to happen today. If she could see it 50 years ago, why don't more of us see it now? Well, with us tonight are some people who love this book and see that, and here also are some people who think the novel and its philosophy are ridiculous, like you, right?
That's right.
Why?
Well, I don't know. I just think the fundamental principle behind the book, I mean, that you should always be selfish, I just think that's crazy. Like, suppose, for example, you're on a cruise ship and you see someone fall overboard. Surely you have to grab a life preserver and throw it to him, even if it requires, like, spilling your drink or getting your clothes dirty, so you can't be selfish then.
And she would say, no, don't?
I mean, as I read the book, she says, you know, you're required, and you're not just allowed to be selfish, you're required to be selfish all the time and only think about the sort of gains to yourself. So if that person could give something back to you, maybe you'd make a deal with him, but if you had to give something to that person and get nothing in return, you're not only are you not required to help him, but you shouldn't help him.
My objection is that Ayn Rand says that the government stands in the way of people reaching their human potential, but how are people going to reach their potential if they don't have quality public education and health care and a clean environment that the government provides?
Government has to provide those things.
I think.
All right, well, let me take those points to our first guest. John Allison is chairman of BB&T Bank, and you love this book, right? And your bank is the 9th biggest bank in America.
Yes, sir.
You give Atlas Shrugged to your executives and ask them to read it.
I do.
Why?
Because I think Rand's ideas are very powerful, although often understood. She is primarily an advocate of reason and the belief that the human mind is the source of all human progress and really the only natural resource, and that for human beings to be productive they have to be free. And that's why a free society is so necessary. It's interesting, in academia they talk about academic freedom, but they believe that business people can produce with all kinds of rules and regulations that prevent them from thinking, prevent them from making independent judgments.
Well, what about his point about she's selling selfishness? If somebody fell off the yacht, too bad.
That's a very misunderstanding her concept of selfishness. She's really an Aristotelian in the concept of selfishness as one's pursuit of one's rational, long-term self-interest properly understood. And what that looks like is you should not take advantage of other people, because taking advantage of other people doesn't work. People don't trust you. You see that in business. Also, you end up being paranoid because you're trying to manipulate other people. But you also shouldn't self-sacrifice. That what we really are in life is traders. We trade value for value. We get better together. In our business, we help our clients be successful economically. They let us make a profit doing it. And life is about creating win-win relationships. that there are only two stable relationship conditions: win-win and lose-lose. And if we try to get greedy and take advantage of other people, we end up with a lose-lose relationship. But interesting enough, when we get self-sacrificial, we end up with a lose-lose relationship. So RAND is really about people pursuing their own rational self-interest, but in the context of what she calls the trader principle, getting better together, creating win-win relationships.
And you've used this in your own business by not making subprime loans and not doing eminent domain cases. I don't get the RAND connection.
Yes, we made two decisions that I think specifically relate to RAND's philosophy. One, when the Supreme Court dramatically broadened the use of eminent domain, where government power could be used to take the property of one individual and give it to another individual, the so-called Kelo decision, we announced we wouldn't make any loans for that purpose. And the reason for that is property rights are essential for a successful economic society. In fact, the single biggest thing correlated with economic well-being is property rights. The abuse of eminent domain is a threat to property rights, which is a threat to our whole economic system. And since we're a bank and we depend on property rights, we thought it was in principle that we should be opposed to that kind of abuse. We also chose not to do the so-called negative amortization, or what are called pick-a-payment mortgage. A pick-a-payment mortgage is where somebody borrows money and the interest expense might be $1,000 a month, but they only pay $500. Each month the mortgage gets bigger. At the time,
lots of banks have done that.
Lots of banks did it, and at the time you could make money doing it because you could sell the mortgage in the secondary market. We chose not to do it over a philosophical principle. Going back to RAND's concept of acting in our rational self-interest, we believe that it's in our self-interest to do the right thing for our clients, because if we do the wrong things for our clients, it's going to come back and bite us in the long term. So we chose not to do those mortgages, not because we couldn't make money in the short term, but we knew a lot of young people were going to get in serious trouble and owe a lot more in the house than it was worth. So we said, we're not going to do this. And people left us and went to other banks, and that's their free will to do that. But we won't ever consciously do something that's bad for our clients. In fact, we believe if we do the right things for our clients in the long term, we'll be more successful. And that is very much a Randian concept.
But you took TARP money. You colluded with government.
Well, that was an interesting experience. I was personally adamantly opposed to TARP. I wrote Congress. I was the only CEO of a large bank that was adamantly opposed to TARP and strongly tried to resist it. However, when the decision was made to do TARP, we were nicely informed by the regulators that they expected us to participate. And the way they did that is we've had these capital rules in the banking business for a long time. We were way overcapitalized by those rules, but they let us know that they were going to have some new capital rules. And under those capital rules, if we didn't take TARP, we weren't going to be properly capitalized. And there was a motivation for that. And this is an interesting thing. Bernanke, the head of the Federal Reserve, is a really great big student of the Depression. So he kind of assumed it was 1930, which is not 2008, wasn't 1930. And what happened in the 30s, when Roosevelt tried to save individual institutions, the market figured out they were in trouble. So Bernanke says, look, we got a few large banks in serious trouble. If we just help those banks and don't help the healthy banks, people will figure out who the bad banks are. So he basically strongly encouraged the $100 billion and plus banks to participate in TARP and made it difficult, very difficult for you not to participate. Now, we were the first people to pay TARP back. And by the way, TARP was a ripoff for healthy banks, because remember, we had to pay a very high interest rate, and the government got warrants, and it cost BB&T about $250 million for money we didn't need because we were overcapitalized. But we basically had to take the money.
And you say, based on Atlas Shrugged, that the current policies are sending America to become a third world country.
I really do, John. That's a long-term trend. We will have some kind of economic recovery, and we'll have some economic growth. I think the most likely intermediate scenario is stagflation like the 1970s. But if you run the numbers on the deficits we have in Medicare, the deficits we have in Social Security, the operating deficits, which are over $1 trillion a year now, and how you undo those is unclear. We have a dysfunctional foreign policy. We have a really big demographic problem because of the retirement of the baby boomers, and that's going to reduce productivity. It's a big demographic problem. And we have a failed K through 12 education system. In 25 years, the United States will be a third world country if we don't change direction. And ironically, we need to go exactly the opposite of the way we're going. We need to return to the ideas that made America great. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Each individual's right to their own life and the right to the product of their own
But this young man said government's job to come in and give people that good education.
Well, I think if you look at the success of our education system, you got to start worrying about that. You know, I'm a huge advocate of education because I think the real source of all human progress is the human mind. But educational systems need competition and discipline. You know, we in business, we talk about being innovative. We don't really like to be innovative. We're forced to be innovative by markets. When you have a government-run monolith, it is not going to be innovative. It's not going to be creative. And people are wrong to view privatization of education like private schools today. What we really need are 10,000 experiments, of which 9,990 would fail, which is what happens in business all the time. Business failures happen all the time.
We don't have that in government, so we'll come back to that and come back to the hostile questions from the audience, as you might have for him. He made $7 million last year. Is that fair? Plus 2 more Atlas experts. I want to ask them today, who is Wesley Mooch? An opinion poll once asked readers, of all the books you've ever read, which one made the biggest difference in your life? The Bible came in first. Atlas Shrugged came in second. So it's a huge bestseller. Made a big difference in people's lives, and yet there's never been an Atlas movie made. It's come close. Angelina Jolie and her partner Brad Pitt were interested. Jolie reportedly said of all the books she's read, she found Dagny Taggart's character the most relatable. But that movie never happened. Charlize Theron and Hilary Swank also talked about making a movie based on the book. It just never came together. However, I'm told soon there will be an Atlas Shrugged miniseries, 6 one-hour segments. So, soon. Now, the book itself. Some people are so inspired by Rand's message, they've devoted their lives to its study. People like our current guests here. We have Huron Brook. He's president of the Ayn Rand Institute. Also with us, Professor Bradley Thompson of Clemson University, director of its Institute for the Study of Capitalism. And again, John Allison of BB&T Bank. So, Professor, let me start with you. This novel is coming to life today?
It is coming to life today. In fact, there are many eerie parallels between what we see happening today and what happens in the novel.
Like?
Well, the nationalization of the economy, the attempt by the last Bush administration and the current administration. So there are scenes that are directly out of the novel. I mean, it's as if the novel were coming to life. So last fall, when Hank Paulson called 6 of the nation's largest bankers to Washington and had them closed in his office, and wouldn't essentially let them out until they'd signed the TARP bill. This is a scene as though we're straight out of Atlas Shrugged, when the lead character, Hank Rearden, is blackmailed by government officials.
Who's Dagny Taggart today?
Well, Dagny Taggart could be
Allison?
John Allison and many businessmen and women today and throughout the course of the last century.
Who's Wesley Mooch?
Wesley Mooch, I think, probably would be either Tim Geithner or, well, there are many government officials today. Tim Geithner would be one, the Secretary of the Treasury. Cass Sunstein, the Czar of Regulation, would be another one.
Because they want to control business.
Because they want to socialize the economy. They want to centralize all government control over the economy in Washington. That's right.
Huron Brook, let me ask you. I think of some of these groups in the book, Friends of Global Progress.
Oh, there's so many of them, anywhere from the various environmentalist groups out there to the various so-called social justice groups that are out there advocating for more and more government controls, more and more government intervention in the name of, it's always in the name of, social progress, in the name of, what is it, global progress, in the name of some collectivistic aim.
I look at some of the laws in the book: the Preservation of Livelihood Law, Equalization of Opportunity Law, Steel Unification Plan, each company paid according to its need. These could be passed today.
They could be passed today. You know, minimum wage type laws are certainly the equality, or the drugs, not drugs, or the pays are, right? The whole idea of taking money from some and equating the equation of compensation completely, and we're seeing that with compensation right now. Compensation czars. I mean, I don't think. I mean, some of these things are so bizarre that are happening right now, I don't think Ayn Rand could have thought of them. That is, reality is outpacing fiction. It is far more radical than even happened in the book. Many people who read the book complained about the fact that this isn't realistic. This could never happen in America. It's worse is happening before our eyes right now.
Bradley Thompson, in the book you have collusion between Wesley Mooch and one businessman. You see that today?
Oh, sure. I would say take Jeffrey Immelt, the CEO of General Electric. General Electric is now spending something like $20 million a year in lobbying in Washington to get Washington to pass laws that restrict competition and favor his company. Not to mention the fact that he's also investing huge amounts of the company's money in causes which will, in the end, ultimately destroy American capitalism, like cap and trade.
And in return, he's received billions in federal guarantees and grants.
That's right.
Who is Wesley Mooch to you?
Bonnie Frank is the... it just pops it in my mind. You know...
Why?
Well, Frank is very explicit about his agenda. He's an egalitarian. He wants to see success destroyed in this country. He believes we are brothers keepers. He wants to take from some and give to the other, and he's very open about that. He's very ambitious. He wants power. It almost, you know, it radiates from his face, the desire to control other people's lives, and that's really Mooch in the novel.
But it's in the public interest.
Well, and that's really a key part of this novel, is the attack on the concept of the public interest. There is no such thing as the public interest. All we have are individuals. And if you violate one individual's rights in order to attain some goal, Atlas Shrugged says, Ayn Rand says, it is immoral, it is wrong. It goes back to this idea of rational self-interest, of the focus on the individual and individualism versus collectivism, and rational self-interest versus you are your brother's keeper, which is this notion that we need to sacrifice some. We need to enslave some. We need to tax some for the benefit of others.
Enslave is big, but you talk about morality. Let's go back to John Allison. He made $7 million. A lot of people here made much less than that. So why is that moral?
Well, actually, John, I think I earned it. When I joined BB&T, when I joined BB&T in 1970,
you earned it because?
When I joined BB&T in 1971, we had probably 200 employees, and I made $600 a month. When I retired, it was a $152 billion company with 30,000 employees. And I had a lot of people that helped me make that happen, but I think I made an important contribution.
Coming up, we will take your questions. Some of the people here are angry. They don't agree with that. And they also say the book is garbage. And some book reviewers agree. When Atlas came out, the New York Times wrote, "It howls in the reader's ear, beats him about the head. The book is written out of hate." Is it? Hate? We'll hear from some of you. Some of you agree with that. So let me start with you, sir. Stand up, please. You don't agree with these guys.
That's right. If we're talking about the personal good here, then I think it's important to take into account that Ayn Rand alienated her husband, her close inner circle, and died alone and bitter. Isn't that damning proof?
Ayn Rand, I think it's pronounced, but it's that she certainly had a pretty bizarre life. Who would like to take that one? Yaron?
Sure. First, we're talking about the ideas and not the person, and I think it's important to separate. But Ayn Rand lived a heroic life. She came here with nothing from the Soviet Union at age 22. She was penniless in Los Angeles. She worked her way up through the studio system, from the wardrobe departments, script departments. She wrote a novel that was rejected by 12 publishers, became a bestseller, word of mouth. Did Ayn Rand make mistakes in some of her personal relationships? Sure. But she was a hero. And the kind of life she lived, we should all strive to live the interesting, fascinating, and life of achievement that she attained.
You, sir.
a similarly personal attack, I guess. Ayn Rand called herself an objectivist, but wouldn't allow any of her followers to call themselves objectivists. They must call themselves students of objectivism. And I just think it's kind of ridiculous and kind of speaks to the whole creepy cult of personality. I know it's not going to be a popular statement for maybe this audience, but...
Yaron, what's your answer to that?
Well, I think that at a time when a new philosophy was being invented, it was being thought out, the appropriate thing, I think, for everybody around her was to consider themselves students of objectivism. I consider myself an objectivist today. I think objectivist is a common term out there. And I think the whole notion of a cult of personality, the whole notion of a cult when you talk about individualists is absurd and ridiculous. And I don't think you'd find that if you interacted with objectivists today. At least more mature ones. I'm not saying that all the teenagers out there who are first really impassioned by this, but if you find the more mature ones, I don't think you'll find any hint of a cult-like atmosphere. This is a group of individuals pursuing their own rational self-interest.
Go ahead.
All right, so you guys are all trashing, what the government's doing with taxes and all these programs, but, surely the government has to tax and do something. So, what should the government be doing? Should the government totally cease to exist? What do you think?
John Allison?
I think the government has a very important role. First, its real fundamental role is to protect individual rights, to make sure that Peter doesn't steal from Paul. And it does that in a variety of ways. One, it has to have a strong military to protect the United States from foreign powers. We need a strong police force to prevent people from stealing from each other. And we need a strong court system that defends individual rights, defends property rights, and settles legitimate disputes. So government is very important. It just needs to do the right things, not redistribute wealth from the productive and give to the non-productive.
You don't think government is doing the right things?
I don't think government's doing the right thing, and I think part of the problem right now is the taxing situation. It may not be overtaxing in every state, but in many, and it's killing businesses, in particular small businesses. Larger businesses can absorb some of these taxes. Smaller businesses, every day I have many entrepreneurial friends. They're laying people off. They're even capping their gross in order to limit the taxes that they have to pay.
Well, that doesn't create many jobs.
John, I'd like to react to that. BB&T is primarily a small business bank, and so we deal with lots of small businesses. And I've never seen, in general, the small business community as depressed as it is today. And it's not just the current taxes, but it's the threat of increased taxes.
I object to this smear of big business. I mean, they all create jobs.
Same thing. Same thing.
But everybody says, oh, small business.
Well,
all business is okay.
Both are good. In fact, all big businesses were small businesses one day.
It's not just businesses, right? Ultimately, in the end, it's individuals that are being taxed. And when you add up federal, state, and local taxes, most middle-class Americans are paying upwards of 40% of their annual salary in taxes, which means that they work every minute of every day for upwards of
5 months.
5 months for somebody else. And it's only after that point that the money that they earn, they get to keep. That's immoral and unjust.
Yes, sir.
Well, I'm a libertarian, and I want individuals to be free, and I want them to live long and prosper and all that. And I know the work of Rand and like the work of John Stossel, of course, but isn't Rand's attack on altruism crazy? I mean, do you really want to tell burglars and lobbyists and, say, union members that they're not selfish enough? They need to think of themselves first more and a little less of other people. Isn't that crazy?
Yaron?
Yes, we do, because what they're doing right now is not being selfish. It's not being truly self-interested. And this is the real revolution in Ayn Rand's ethics. Ayn Rand's ethics is not about the self-interest. It's not about doing what you feel like doing. It's not about doing what, emotionally, taking the cocaine because it's there, or taking the power because it's there. It's figuring out, and this is why being selfish is hard work. It's figuring out what is really in my long-term rational self-interest. And all those groups, Bernie Madoff was not selfish. He was self-destructive. He self-destructed. He lived a miserable, pathetic life even before he was caught. So self-interest is not doing whatever whim comes. It is thinking about what is truly rationally in your self-interest. And none of those people who you mentioned do that. And if they did, they wouldn't be burglars and bureaucrats and so on. They'd be productive members within the world we live in.
I thank you all. When we come back, what's a fish pedicure? What do these fish have to do with Atlas Shrugged and your freedom? When we return. So, how do the Wesley Mooches of today's big government restrict our lives? One regulation at a time. I'm here with Nick Gillespie of Reason TV. Reason's covered the ever-expanding nanny state for years. Why do you call it the nanny state?
We call it the nanny state because whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, a liberal or a conservative, if you're a politician, you pass all kinds of laws telling us what we can eat, how we can paint our houses, what we can smoke or where we can smoke, whether we can ride a bicycle without a helmet, all sorts of things. They're treating us like children. They're treating us like we are,
It's for our safety.
It might be for their safety, but there's, safety. So let's say here, safety second, freedom first.
Okay. They do like to ban things.
They pass new bans on smoking, on trans fat, on baggy pants. So many things someone wants to ban.
And now one more. What the audience here knows and what most of you didn't know until now is that Nick and I have been getting pedicures. A pedicure from fish. These little fish nibble on your feet. They eat off the bad parts. This is how some people have gotten pedicures for hundreds of years, and fish pedicures are now popular in Asia. And today, some entrepreneurs have brought this to America. This man over here, John Ho, brought us these fish. This is your business? You have salons in Virginia?
Yes.
How many?
3.
And people like this?
They loved it.
Why? Why?
Because it's different than a traditional pedicure. It's the only pedicure where you sit in the water and laugh and have a good time at the same time.
He charges $45 for this, and I'm told this is popular, so what's the problem? Well, the problem is that 14 states, we could call them nanny states, have banned them. Now, this is hardly a big infringement on our freedom, but it's indicative of how government...
Talk for yourself.
Oh, so why do they want to ban this? Well, our next guest will tell us, because he wants to ban it. Jeffrey Klein is a state legislator from New York. Actually, today he's in San Juan for a conference. He says fish pedicures are dirty, dangerous, and mean to the fish. So, Jeffrey, dirty, dangerous, why?
Well, John, let me just say, first of all, I'm a big fan of Ayn Rand, and I don't think you can equate a sanitary condition, in other words, legislating sanitary conditions where you would be considered a looter or a moocher. This is an important health issue. People can get very, very sick. Presently in New York State, the nail and hair industry is very heavily regulated. They want to make
Has
sure...
anybody gotten sick anywhere?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, there was a podiatrist, Dr. Robert Spaulding, who wrote a book that said that the practice of fish pedicure should be banned because you can't sterilize a fish between use.
Well, I guess it would kill the fish to sterilize them, but
exactly.
We could find no evidence of anybody getting an infection or having any problem. Paul Abdul lost a fingernail from a regular manicure. Should we ban all manicures?
Like I said, this is a very heavily regulated industry. This is something that's, I think, needs to be banned because it goes against the entire practice of being able to prevent cross-contamination through adequate sterilization of equipment.
But you have no evidence that anybody's died, anything's happened to anybody?
There was a lot of complaints in the states that actually had fish pedicures before they banned it. People actually were able... People got staph infections and other things.
You know, I'm having it done now. Feels good. I'm willing to take the risk. Isn't it up to me? Aren't you just a busybody taking away other people's freedom?
Well, again, I've prided myself over the years on not only taking on this specific industry, but also dirty supermarkets, dirty restaurants. I wrote legislation which requires that supermarkets post their most recent inspection results. We need to educate people. We need to let people know that some of the things that they do can make them sick.
Well, I guess we'll expect more regulations from you. Thank you, Jeff. Nick,
Thank you, John.
What's your reaction?
Well, you know, I do want to point out that the fish have nibbled off my extra toes on each foot, so I'm very grateful. And my feet were, when I grew up in New Jersey, my feet were officially declared a Superfund toxic waste site, and this is helping them quite a bit. You know, there's a bunch of things in what the state senator was saying that are just wrong. First off, you don't need the government to do ratings. You know, and first off, when you talk about food, say restaurants or whatever, absent you know, a food inspector from the state who may or may not be on the take. When Los Angeles started its letter grade policy, immediately after that there was a huge scandal there where it turned out a bunch of people were paying for grades and things like that. This happens all the time. Restaurants have a lot of information that goes out in newspapers. They send it out. Why wouldn't a private company actually start rating restaurants, which would have, you know, you could have more than 1 or 2 different certifications.
The private companies tend not to come in because they assume government's taking care of it.
All I'm saying is that a lot of things, and this is particularly true in an era of financial crisis where government, like other businesses, should be focusing on its core activities. Government doesn't have to regulate food businesses. Businesses will do that. Very few restaurants, very few manicure shops do well by killing their customers or making them sick. This is not a good business model.
Bigger rules. Smoking, passive smoke.
You know, passive
people
smoke,
like it.
Yeah, and this is also one of the things that, you know, I like it too. I'm not a smoker. I never was a smoker. I benefit from smoking bans. However, people who own businesses or people who decide to work at businesses should be able to make the choice to say, I want to do it this way or that way, as long as people know the risks. And this is part of the nanny state. What is strange is we are at a point in history where people are wealthier, relatively speaking. They're more educated. They're more in charge of their life across more different dimensions.
And living longer.
That's right. And now we're having government come in and people like New York State legislatures who cannot balance the budget, who are billions of dollars in debt, and are telling us, you know, leave the little fish alone. This is wrong. This is wrong. It's not their business, and it shouldn't be their business to regulate other businesses, especially now.
I would add to the smoking ban, it's the dictatorship of the majority. I like it. I don't smoke, but can't the smokers have some bars? And you were really wimps, you smokers. You just rolled over. But that's how it works.
You know, but again, you know, and you can start small. I mean, if they're banning fish pedicures with little guppies or carps here, I got a feeling that the bikini lines with the piranha are not coming anytime soon. But this is part of the problem with the nanny state and with the prohibitionist mindset anyway. If consenting adults and informed adults who take responsibility for their lives and live with the responsibility of their actions, which is how we should live, want to do something, it's going to happen. You can ban something, and if people want it, it's going to create a black market, which creates far more problems, and it's much harder to regulate through the courts or through any other kind of contractual obligation.
To be continued. What do you think? Is intuitive to think we need the nanny state's rules to keep us safe. Without them, we do dumb things, hurt ourselves. I no longer think it's true. We ought to have the right to control our own lives. But next, your thoughts about how has the nanny state affected your life? Should government protect us from things that might be dangerous, like fish pedicures? I think most Americans would say yes, and maybe not fish pedicures, but would you stand up? You have a more reasonable thing you want to regulate.
Well, I think people should wear helmets when they're riding bicycles or motorcycles.
Nick Gillespie of Reason Magazine, what about that? You don't wear the motorcycle helmet, your head cracks open like a watermelon, and everybody else has to pay for that, and you're dead.
John, you've zeroed in on one of the problems of the nanny state, which is that if we're going to say we're going to pay for everything bad that ever happens to anybody because of their own choices, then you have a claim to say, well, you shouldn't even be riding motorcycles then. Because the fact is that if you're riding a motorcycle, you're more likely to be in an accident. The key, if you believe in freedom, if you believe in individual liberty, and you believe in choice and responsibility, and these things go together, then you have to say, let's give people more choices, but also more responsibility. And I think it should be up to the individual to decide, do I want to ride a motorcycle in the first place? Do I want to wear a helmet or not? Various states have different regimes for that type of thing. Anything that multiplies an individual's choice is generally a good thing, as long as you're not sticking other people with the bill for your own decisions.
Well, but what about that? What about the greater good? What if you don't have insurance and you get an infection from this fish pedicure, or you ride that motorcycle and everybody else has to pay for you?
Here, if I get an infection from the fish pedicure, the person who's going to pay is the businessman, because nobody goes in and says, give me that infection. I would really like that as part of the pedicure package, right? So, you know, and which is different than other things. And there's no question that there's a huge role in American life in capitalist societies for charity. All of the philanthropies came out of the wealth that was generated by capitalism. Poor people will not go starving, and they won't go begging for medical attention in a truly free society.
Another big one today is cell phone use in cars, and I use it in the car and I'm distracted. You want that regulated?
To a degree. I want some things regulated to the extent that they infringe upon other people's rights. So if I'm driving down the road, some guy's on a cell phone, loses control, crashes into me, kills me, that's bad. You know, if he wants to do something self-destructive which doesn't affect other people, I don't care what he does.
So how is... Thank you. I mean, how is that nanny state? It's not just about me as the driver. I might kill somebody else.
Yeah, well, you know, there's a couple things there. First off, that is not, when you're talking about something where you're in, you know, that's like shouting fire in a crowded theater when there is no fire. It's in a public space and it's different. The roads are different for the most part than an individual business or what you do in your own house. By the same token, we should look at the fact that, you know, distracted driving ordinances make sense, and it doesn't matter if you are driving under the influence of booze or drugs or texting or listening to music or whatever. If that's a factor in an accident, you should be held extra responsible for that because you've knowingly put other people at risk as well as yourself.
How do you hold someone extra responsible?
In the same way that if you get into an accident and you're straight, you know, you get one penalty. If you're drunk, you get an intensified penalty, which was not always the case. I think those types of laws make sense because you're knowingly increasing the risk not only for yourself but people around you. By the same token, a lot of these laws don't actually get to the point of, like, how do you actually control people's behavior? A lot of laws, like seatbelt laws, which makes sense. I always wear a seatbelt when I drive because it makes you a lot safer. You're much more likely to survive a crash.
Well, let me just stop you on that. Seatbelt law doesn't make you wear a seatbelt.
That's right. No, exactly. The information of people making informed choices is what really dictates this thing. But what I was going to say is that with a lot of these laws that are put in there for our own good, they end up taking on different kind of tenors when you look at the way that they're practiced. So when seatbelt laws went from being what was called a secondary enforcement law, where if you got pulled over for something else and you weren't wearing a seatbelt, you could get an extra ticket for not wearing the seatbelt. Now virtually every state has them as a primary enforcement. So if a cop, you're driving by and a cop says, oh, I think you weren't wearing a seatbelt, they can pull you over. Or you're texting, or you're eating, or you're distracted driving. These types of rules inevitably end up affecting people who drive older cars, poorer people, minorities. They always get pulled over more. So the nanny state, even if you take its intentions as pure as the driven snow, a lot of the times the way that they play out is that they end up policing segments of the population who are already under all sorts of duress. This is certainly true with trans fat bans, which are always they're always targeted, the way that the laws are written, to fast food places and to restaurants where relatively poor people, relatively powerless people eat. They don't go after Mario Batali, they don't go after Bobby Flay, they go after Arby's, and they go after you know, an empanada stand.
They are another invitation for the police to come into your life.
It's one more pretext for the state, and the police are the agent of the state. You don't need to be paranoid about this, but there is no question. We live in this bifurcated world where on a certain level we have more control over how we live our lives, what kinds of books we read, what kinds of music we listen to, how we can express ourselves. And then you have, on the other hand, more and more centralized political power of all sorts trying to control our speech, control our thoughts, control our lives. And we always need to be struggling against that if we want to stay free, and I think we do, because freedom is the engine of progress. It's the engine of living a full life.
Thank you, Nick. We will keep covering the nanny state, as will Reason TV. Its website features a nanny of the month. Up next, Hating Capitalism and Atlas Shrugged. This book is so popular still. This year, its Amazon ranking was as high as number 15, yet it's half a century old. My book is just a couple of years old. It was a bestseller, but it's already ranking down in the tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands. So Atlas really must speak to people. Sales records show it's a book people turn to when government grows and scares us. The Economist published this graph of Atlas book sales over the past few years and pointed out that sales spiked when government grew or increased our debt. Here, the government announced interest rate cuts. Here when the Bush administration announced it would support subprime lending. Here when Obama was elected president. Here when Obama passed the enormous stimulus package. Here's a graph that goes back further, 25 years. This year, Atlas book sales doubled. So, this is a hugely popular book. 7 million copies have been sold, and yet there's never been a movie made. Many in our audience sneer at the book. So, why? I think it's because elites in America hate the message. Rand celebrates capitalism and the individual. Elites don't like individualism, and they really don't like capitalism. In every newsroom I've worked in, and at my college, Princeton, capitalism was derided as selfishness. And lately, as a failure.
This is a failure of capitalism.
Quite a mess indeed.
The media tell us our current economic problems are proof that the free market has failed.
If I hear one of these ignorant, hypocritical, sanctimonious free traders ever talk about free markets again, they should be pilloried.
Pilloried? That's ignorant nonsense. The truth is that free markets, capitalism, have lifted more people out of the mud and misery of stoop labor and terrible poverty than any system ever. In just the last 30 years, the World Bank says 500 million people who once lived on less than $1.25 a day have moved up and out of poverty. Free markets made that possible. But now, Wesley Mooch, Congress and the bureaucrats tell us they're going to fix capitalism. Their rules will make it better, kinder. Who are they kidding? They just can't conceive of a world where they are not the most important players. There will always be people who want to control our lives, who don't want anyone to get a fish pedicure, who think government and business should work together for the common good. But that's not what creates the common good. Rand had it right. She learned the hard way in Russia. What makes a country work for its people is leaving the Dagny Taggarts and John Galts alone, leaving them free to take risks, start new businesses, invent things, and also free to keep the rewards of their own work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Some call that selfishness, but that misses the point. I call it enlightened self-interest. When free people act in their own self-interest, society prospers. And that's our program for tonight. I'm John Stossel. See you next week.